Welcome back to Techline Africa. In the last video, we set up our environment. Today, we write our first real JavaScript, and we do it while building the first visible piece of TaskFlow. By the end of this episode, you will have a start page with a header and your first task, living as a JavaScript object. Concept first, then we build. Let's go. What is a variable? A variable is basically a container that holds a value. Or we can define a variable as a placeholder for storing a value. In JavaScript, we can declare variables in three ways, using var, let, and const. Var is the older way of declaring a variable, so we are not going to use it in this series. For example, we can declare a variable, task, and assign a value, steady JavaScript. This is what we are doing. Let will tell JavaScript that we want to create a variable. Task is a variable name. Steady JavaScript is a value that we are assigning to task. So task becomes the container, and inside the container, we are storing steady JavaScript, which is the value. We can also go ahead and declare a variable using const pi, and we assign 3.14. When do we use let and when do we use const? We use let when the value of the variable might change later in the program. For example, task in this instance is to steady JavaScript, but in another instance, task can now become steady React. So on line 5, the initial value of task was to steady JavaScript. Now we are done studying JavaScript. We want to move on to the new task, which is to steady React. So the value is no longer steady JavaScript. On line 9, the value of task becomes steady React. Const basically means constant. So in JavaScript, we use const when the value of a variable stays the same throughout the entire program. For example, in calculating the area of a circle, the value of pi stays the same and it never changes. So it just makes sense to create the variable as a constant variable. In an attempt to change the value of pi, we get an error because constant values can never be changed. It's advisable to always declare a variable using const. And if the value of that variable will change in the future, then always use let. Now that we have declared our variables, we can always reference them through the entire code. And we've already done one. So on line 5, we declared a variable task and we assigned a value steady JavaScript. And then on line 9, we referenced the variable task and assigned a new value steady React. We can access the value in it just by logging into the console. So you save your work, you open your browser, right click, you go to inspect, and then on the console tab, refresh the page, then you see steady React. Mind you, you are seeing steady React instead of steady JavaScript because program execution starts from the top. So on line 5, the initial value was steady JavaScript, and on line 9, we reference the same variable and we assigned a new value. So steady JavaScript is now out of date. In JavaScript, we can store different types of data, and that brings us to the concept of data types. In JavaScript, we have the following data types that we are going to work with. We have the string data type. We have the number data type. We have the Boolean data type. We have the array data type. And we have the object data type. A string is basically anything inside the code. So for example, I can have a variable first name equals John and last name equals Doe. Notice here that I am using double quote for the first name and single quote for the last name. In JavaScript, all of them applies. A number data type does not need a quote. So I can declare a variable age equals 50. Or I can declare another variable mark equals 55.6. A Boolean variable only stores either true or false value. So I can have a variable let is completed and set it to either true or false. This is completed variable can only have one of these values, either to be true or to be false. An array is a data type that allows you to store a list of items or a collection of items. For example, I can have a list of cars and store them in one variable instead of saving them as individual variables. Take note, when declaring an array, you use a square bracket, and inside a square bracket, you list out your items separated by commas. Each item in an array has a position called an index, and indexes are always starting from 0 and incrementing by 1. So for this example, Volvo is at index 0, Audi is at index 1, BMW is at index 2. To access the individual items in an array, you just have to make a reference to the name of the array and then specifically set the position or the index that you want to access. So in this case, I am going to access the very first item in the array. So you save your work and then in your console, you refresh the page. You should see the first item, Volvo. If I want to access the second item, I change the index to 1 because indexes are always incrementing by 1. From 0, we move to 1. Save the work, refresh the page, and you should see the second item. An object in JavaScript is a data structure that stores data as key value pairs. Each key is a string or a symbol, and each value can be any valid JavaScript type. For example, I can declare a variable first task. Object in JavaScript stores data as key value pairs. So if I want to store data related to the first task, in between this curly bracket, I can have the first key title as steady JavaScript. And another key is completed, which can have a value of false. Now, title becomes the key, steady JavaScript becomes the value. Is completed, it becomes the key, and false becomes the value. Note that JavaScript keys are also referred to as properties. Unlike arrays, where we access items using the indexes or the positions, to access a property in an object, you reference the object name, first task, then you use the dot operator, then you specify the property that you want to access. Save the work, open the browser, refresh the page, and you should see steady JavaScript displayed. This is what we are doing. We reference the variable name, in this case the object, And using the dot operator, we have access to the property. We can also go ahead and access the is completed property. You save, you refresh the page, and you should see the current value saved in that particular property. When naming variables, always start with a letter, an underscore, or a dollar sign. For example, we can declare a variable let name equals Kofi. We can also declare another variable let underscore age equals 50. Or we can declare a variable let dollar phone equals don't start variable names with numbers and avoid keywords like if, const, let, etc. JavaScript is case sensitive, which means let name as this variable is not the same as let name equals Amma. Now that we've seen the concept, how does this variables and data types relate to our project? Let's go ahead and declare some variables that we will need for the project. The very first one is tasks, which will be an array because we intend to store multiple items. Then we have current filter. Let's set it to all for now. And then our very first task, const first task. And it will have the following properties: ID of 1, title, steady JS, a description of watch tutorials, status of pending, a priority of high, created at. Let's use a string for now. So this is what we've done so far. We've learned the concept of variables and data types, and we have directly used it to create our first task as an object with the following properties. And these are the properties that we need for each task that we are going to create. Now that we have created our first task as an object, let's go ahead and update our HTML page to match the project that we are creating. The entire application will be wrapped in a div container with a class of app. And then we create the header portion of the application. We create our title, and the flow should be in a span tag. After the header, we add a paragraph tag with a class of subtitle and a content of build as you learn. Save your work, open your browser and refresh the page, and you should have this output. HTML basically helps you create the structure of your web page. To add styles like colors and font styles, we need to have a cascading style sheet, a CSS file. So on the left hand side, create a new file with the name styles.css. When this file is created, we need to link it to the HTML page. So after the title, add a link tag. style sheet, and a hyperreference of styles.css. And that is it. We have linked our CSS to the HTML file. So whatever style that we write here will directly affect our web page. Now let's go ahead and add some styles to our web page. Make sure the CSS file is opened, and we'll create some custom properties that we are going to use later in the code. Note that custom properties in CSS are also known as CSS variables, and every property has a prefix of double hyphens. Let's go ahead and add global styles to remove the default margins and paddings that comes with some of the HTML elements. For the main body, let's add the following styles. Note here that we are using the variable that we declared earlier. So we declare variables using this prefix, and then we access the variable by calling the var function in CSS and specifying the variable name. And we are doing same for the color. Let's reference the app class that we created earlier and give it a max width of 780 pixels, and then a margin top and bottom of 0, left and right of auto, so that it can be centered. A padding of 48 pixels for the top, left and right of 24 pixels, and then bottom of 80 pixels. Then for the header, a margin bottom of 48 pixels. Note here that we are referencing classes using the dot operator, but the header is an HTML element, so we can reference it directly without any dot operator. We can also reference our heading 1 tag, give it a font size of clamp 2 rem, 6 view width, and then 3.2 rem, and a font weight of 800. And the span tag that we have in the H1, we give it a color of accent. Notice we are using the variable name here again, the one that we created earlier. For the subtitle, let's go ahead and reference it and give the following class. So a font size of 0.78 rem, a color of muted, letter spacing 0.08 rem, text transformation of uppercase, and a margin top of 4 pixels. Let's also set a font family of DM mono and a default of monospace. Now save your work, open your browser and refresh the page, and you should now have this output. This is what we have done so far. We've learned the concept of variables and data types, and we have used that concept to create our very first task as a JavaScript object. We have also created the header section of TaskFlow using HTML and CSS. In the next video, we are going to learn the concept of functions and loops. We will create our input form and a button using HTML, and then use the concept of functions directly in TaskFlow. See you in the next video.